I've always had a fascination with antiques. There's something hauntingly beautiful about objects with stories hidden in their cracks and edges. But sometimes, that hidden history is better left undiscovered. It was last summer when I stumbled upon an old antique shop tucked away in an alley I'd never noticed before. The sign above the door read, "Timeless Echoes." The place felt like it belonged in a different century. Dim lighting, creaking floorboards, and the faint scent of lavender and decay. At first, it was the mirrors that caught my eye. They lined the walls, each frame a masterpiece of craftsmanship, each reflective surface murky with age. Some were simple, others were ornate, dripping with gilded carvings of ivy, roses, and grotesque cherubs. But one mirror in particular stood out, a tall, oval piece in a black wooden frame. Its glass shimmered faintly, as if it were holding onto some long-forgotten light. When I asked the shopkeeper about it, he paused, his expression tightening briefly before softening again. "That one's special," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Many stories tied to it. People say it shows things you shouldn't see." "Like what?" I asked, laughing nervously. He only shrugged. "Some claim it reflects more than just the present. The past, maybe. The dead." It should have been enough to make me walk away. But instead, I found myself drawn to it. Against my better judgment, I bought the mirror that same day, ignoring the unease in the shopkeeper's eyes as he helped me load it into my car. I brought the mirror home and set it up in the hallway, right outside my bedroom. It seemed to radiate a quiet kind of presence, as though it didn't quite belong. Still, I told myself it was just my imagination. Antiques have that effect sometimes, right? That first night, I had a strange dream. In it, I stood in front of the mirror, staring at my reflection. But the reflection didn't move with me. It stood there, motionless, its eyes hollow and sunken, its mouth stretching into an unnatural grin. When I woke up, I dismissed it as nothing more than the result of too much wine and a long day. For the first few days, everything seemed normal. The mirror was just a mirror, beautiful, mysterious, but harmless. Then, things began to change. It started subtly. Late at night, when the house was quiet, I'd catch faint whispers coming from the hallway. At first, I thought it was the wind slipping through the old windows, but the sound grew louder, more distinct, like hushed voices speaking just out of reach. Sometimes, I'd find the mirror slightly tilted, as if someone had tried to move it. Other times, the glass seemed off, like ripples in water. One evening, as I walked past it to head to bed, I stopped in my tracks. The reflection of the hallway in the mirror didn't match what was behind me. The picture frame on the wall was crooked in the reflection, but perfectly straight in reality. My breath caught as I stared, my heart pounding in my chest. "It's just an illusion," I whispered to myself. But my own voice didn't sound right. Too shaky, too uncertain. Then, the dreams returned. Each night, they grew darker. I'd see myself standing in front of the mirror, my reflection moving in ways I couldn't control. Sometimes it would wave at me. Other times, it would point toward the hallway behind me, its lips moving soundlessly. But the worst dream came on the 7th night. In it, I woke to find my room bathed in an eerie, pale blue light. The mirror was no longer in the hallway. It was in my bedroom, towering over the foot of my bed. My reflection was there, but this time it wasn't smiling. It was sobbing, its hands pressed against the glass as though it were trapped inside. When I sat up, the reflection screamed, its voice muffled but piercing, shaking the walls around me. I bolted upright in bed, drenched in sweat, the sound still ringing in my ears. When I checked the hallway the next morning, the mirror was still in its place. But the glass had a long, jagged crack running through it, as if something inside had tried to break free. I told myself I was imagining things, but the fear gnawed at me. I decided to cover the mirror. Grabbing an old bedsheet, I draped it over the frame, feeling an odd relief once its surface was hidden. For a while it worked. The whispers stopped, and the dreams faded into the background of restless sleep. But then, 2 weeks later, the bedsheet slipped off. I woke in the middle of the night to the sound of fabric brushing the floor. Sitting up, I blinked into the darkness. My heart sank when I saw the mirror standing uncovered in the hallway, its surface glowing faintly in the moonlight. The air felt charged, heavy with something I couldn't name. Summoning what courage I could muster, I got out of bed and approached the mirror. My reflection stared back at me, looking perfectly normal. I let out a shaky breath and was about to turn away when I saw it, a figure in the background, standing at the far end of the hallway. I froze, my eyes locked on the dark silhouette. It was tall and motionless, its head tilted slightly, as if watching me. Slowly, I turned around, expecting to see someone standing there. But the hallway was empty. When I looked back at the mirror, the figure was gone. My reflection, however, remained rooted to the spot, staring at me even as I stepped back. The next day, I tried to get rid of the mirror. I called the antique shop, but the line was disconnected. I drove to the alley where I'd found it, but the store was gone, replaced by a boarded-up storefront that looked like it had been abandoned for years. Panic set in as I realized I was stuck with it. I tried everything, moving it to the garage, locking it in a storage unit, even covering it with layers of cloth and taping them down. But no matter where I put it, the mirror would find its way back to the hallway, uncovered and pristine, its surface gleaming as if mocking me. Then came the night it finally escalated. I was sitting on the couch, trying to distract myself with a book, when the lights began to flicker. The faint whispers returned, louder this time, echoing through the house. My stomach knotted as I heard footsteps, soft, deliberate, approaching from the hallway. I grabbed a flashlight and turned it on, shining it down the corridor. The beam landed on the mirror, and my blood turned to ice. My reflection was gone. Instead, the glass showed the hallway behind me, but it wasn't my house anymore. The walls were crumbling, the floorboards warped and broken. Shadows twisted and writhed along the edges of the frame, and faintly, I could see figures moving, pale, gaunt shapes with hollow eyes and mouths stretched too wide. One of them stepped closer, pressing its hands against the glass. Its head turned slowly, as if searching for me, and then it locked eyes with mine. A slow, malevolent grin spread across its face. "Join us," it whispered, though its lips didn't move. I stumbled back, my flashlight dropping to the floor. The room plunged into darkness, and the last thing I saw was the figure stepping through the glass, its body stretching unnaturally as it emerged into my world. The air turned frigid as the figure fully stepped out of the mirror. Its limbs were too long, its movements jerky, like a puppet on invisible strings. Shadows clung to it, writhing like living things. My heart raced, and every instinct screamed at me to run, but my legs felt rooted to the floor. "Join us," it whispered again, the words dripping with malice. Its voice echoed in my head, louder than any scream I'd ever heard. The thing took a step toward me, its feet barely touching the floor. My breath came in short, panicked gasps as I scrambled backward, grabbing the flashlight and shining it at the creature. It recoiled, its face contorting in anger, but it didn't retreat. Instead, it lunged. I barely managed to dodge as its hand swiped at me, its claw-like fingers leaving deep gouges in the wall. I bolted, my feet pounding against the floor as I sprinted toward the kitchen. Behind me, the sound of its footsteps was wrong. Too fast, too loud, like it was crawling up the walls and ceiling as it chased me. Reaching the kitchen, I grabbed the largest knife I could find and turned to face it. The thing emerged from the hallway, its twisted body crouched low, its head tilting unnaturally as it regarded me. Its eyes glowed faintly, their light casting eerie patterns across the room. "Leave me alone," I screamed, slashing at the air in front of me. It let out a guttural laugh, a sound that sent a shiver down my spine. "You brought us here," it hissed. "You invited us in." I swung the knife as it lunged again, the blade cutting into its arm. Black, tar-like ooze dripped from the wound, hissing as it hit the floor. The creature screeched, a sound so piercing I thought my eardrums would burst. Clutching my head, I stumbled backward, and it seized the opportunity, grabbing me by the arm. Its touch was ice cold, and pain shot through me as its fingers dug into my skin. Images flooded my mind. Endless corridors lined with mirrors, countless faces staring out, their eyes filled with despair. I saw people trapped behind the glass, pounding on it, their screams silent, but their agony unmistakable. "You'll join them," the creature said, dragging me toward the hallway. "Everyone does." Summoning every ounce of strength I had, I swung the knife again, catching it in the face. It howled, releasing me, and I fell to the floor. Adrenaline surged through me as I scrambled to my feet, running back toward the mirror. The surface was shimmering again, its reflection distorted and rippling like water. Without thinking, I grabbed the nearest heavy object, a lamp, and hurled it at the mirror. The glass shattered with an ear-splitting crash, fragments scattering across the floor. For a moment, everything was still. The creature let out a guttural scream, its body convulsing as if the destruction of the mirror had severed some vital connection. It clawed at the air, its form flickering like a bad signal, before collapsing into a heap of shadows that dissolved into nothingness. I stood there, trembling, surrounded by shards of glass. The silence was deafening, broken only by my ragged breathing. The mirror was gone, its frame empty, its power seemingly broken. But as relief began to wash over me, I noticed something. Among the shards on the floor, one piece still shimmered faintly, its surface reflecting not the room, but the shadowy realm beyond. And in the corner of that reflection, something moved. I reached down to pick it up, but as my fingers brushed the glass, I froze. A pale hand slammed against the other side, followed by a face twisted in a desperate, silent scream. I dropped the shard, watching as it stopped glowing and turned to ordinary glass. But the feeling of being watched never left me. Even now, as I write this, I can't shake the sensation that something is waiting, just beyond the edges of my reflection, waiting for another chance to come through. It started with the notes. Maya found the first one taped to her apartment door one humid July evening after work. It was written on a torn scrap of paper, the edges uneven, like it had been ripped in a hurry. The message was simple but chilling. "I like the way you smile. Do it again tomorrow." Her heart skipped a beat as she looked up and down the dimly lit hallway of her building. It was quiet, save for the distant hum of a neighbor's television. Maya tried to laugh it off, convincing herself it was some weird prank. Maybe one of the kids down the hall thought it would be funny. But deep down, something didn't feel right. By the time she found the second note 2 days later, her unease had grown into a simmering fear. This one was left on her windshield, held down by a rock. "That red dress you wore last week suits you. Wear it again soon." Maya's stomach churned as she glanced around the parking lot. The sun was setting, casting long shadows between the cars. There was no one there, at least no one she could see. She grabbed the note and got into her car, locking the doors immediately. As she drove away, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her. The notes kept coming, each one more unsettling than the last. "I see you when you think no one else does. Your hair looks pretty up, but I like it better down. You forgot to lock your window last night." That last one made her blood run cold. She didn't even remember leaving the window open. Maya reported it to the police, but without evidence, there was little they could do. The officer she spoke with was kind but dismissive, suggesting she might have an overzealous admirer. "Just keep an eye out," he said, handing her a brochure on self-defense. The lack of urgency in his voice infuriated her. This wasn't harmless infatuation. This was stalking. That night, she triple-checked the locks on her doors and windows, drew the curtains, and left all the lights on. She even placed a heavy chair under the doorknob to her bedroom for extra measure. Sleep didn't come easily, and when it did, it was plagued by vivid nightmares of faceless figures lurking in the shadows. The next morning, she woke up to find her kitchen window open. Her first instinct was to call the police, but something stopped her. The thought of being brushed off again made her stomach twist. Instead, she grabbed her phone and began snapping pictures of the window, the locks, and the sill where faint smudges, handprints, marked the edge. That evening, She stayed late at work, reluctant to go home. When she finally mustered the courage to return, she found her apartment exactly as she'd left it. No notes, no open windows, no sign of anything out of place. The relief was almost enough to make her cry. But as she was getting ready for bed, her phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "You're late tonight. I missed you." Her breath caught in her throat. She stared at the screen, her fingers trembling as she fumbled to block the number. A second text came through before she could. "Don't ignore me, Maya. I don't like it when you ignore me." She dropped the phone, her mind racing. How did he get her number? How did he know her name? Maya didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant sound from the street below, sent her heart racing. She kept a kitchen knife under her pillow, her hand gripping the handle so tightly her knuckles ached. The breaking point came 2 nights later. It was just past midnight when she heard it, a soft tapping on her bedroom window. She lived on the 3rd floor. Her pulse thundered in her ears as she crept toward the window, her knife clutched tightly in her hand. The tapping continued, rhythmic and deliberate. As she reached the curtains, her phone buzzed again. Another text. "Look outside." Her hands shook as she pulled back the curtain. Her scream caught in her throat as she saw him. A man in a black hoodie clinging to the fire escape, his face partially obscured by the shadows. He smiled, raising a hand to wave slowly, mockingly. Before she could react, he pressed something against the glass. It was a Polaroid photograph. In it, Maya was sleeping, her face illuminated by the glow of her bedside lamp. She stumbled back, nearly dropping the knife. Her phone buzzed again. "You're even prettier up close." Maya's heart felt like it might burst out of her chest as she stumbled back, clutching the knife so tightly her knuckles turned white. The man's face was partially hidden beneath the hood, but his grin was unmistakable, a sickening mix of malice and delight. The fire escape creaked as he shifted his weight, pressing the Polaroid harder against the glass before tucking it into the frame of the window. He tapped the glass one more time, then whispered something she couldn't hear through the barrier. And then he was gone. Maya didn't wait. With shaking hands, she dialed 911, choking out her address and describing what had just happened. The dispatcher tried to keep her calm, but her voice trembled with fear as she begged for them to come quickly. The police arrived within minutes, but by the time they reached her apartment, the man had vanished without a trace. They checked the fire escape, the surrounding area, and even questioned the neighbors, but no one had seen or heard anything unusual. One of the officers examined the Polaroid, his face grim as he handed it back to her. "Do you have any idea who this might be?" he asked. "No," Maya whispered, her voice cracking. "I've never seen him before." The officer nodded, his expression sympathetic but resigned. "We'll keep a patrol car in the area tonight. Keep your doors and windows locked, and call us immediately if he comes back." As they left, Maya felt more alone than ever. The police meant well, but she could tell they didn't take it as seriously as they should. She was just another case, another name on a long list of people in need of help. That night, she barely slept. Every sound felt amplified. Every shadow seemed to move. She left the kitchen light on and kept the knife close at hand, her phone fully charged and ready to call for help at a moment's notice. Sometime around 3 a.m., she finally drifted into a restless sleep. When she woke the next morning, her blood turned cold. Another Polaroid was on her nightstand, this one of her sleeping again, her knife visible in the frame. Her phone buzzed. "You're so cute when you try to protect yourself." Maya's hands shook as she stared at the message. He'd been inside her apartment. He'd been standing right next to her while she slept, and she hadn't woken up. That day, she didn't go to work. Instead, she went straight to a hardware store and bought a deadbolt, extra locks, and a motion sensor alarm. She spent hours installing them, her fear growing with every passing minute. By the time she was done, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across her apartment. Maya sat on the couch, clutching the knife and staring at her phone. She didn't know what else to do. Calling the police felt pointless. They hadn't found anything last time, and she doubted this time would be any different. She considered staying with a friend or booking a hotel, but the thought of leaving her apartment felt equally terrifying. What if he followed her? What if he was already watching her from the street below? Her phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a text but a picture. Her stomach turned as she opened it. It was a live photo. The short clip played automatically, showing her standing at her kitchen counter earlier that day, installing the new locks. The caption read, "You're wasting your time." Her scream caught in her throat as the motion alarm in the living room went off. A high-pitched beep filled the air, and her body froze. The knife slipped from her grasp, clattering to the floor. For a moment, there was silence. Then came the sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate, heavy. They moved toward the hallway where she was hiding, her breath coming in shallow gasps as she scrambled for her phone. Her fingers trembled as she dialed 911 again, whispering into the receiver, "He's inside. Please hurry." The footsteps stopped just outside her bedroom door. She could see the shadow of his feet beneath the gap, could hear the low, raspy sound of his breathing. He knocked lightly, almost politely. "Maya," he called softly. His voice was calm, conversational, like they were old friends. "You don't need to be scared. I just want to see you." Her pulse thundered in her ears as the doorknob rattled. The new lock held, but he chuckled under his breath. "You think this will stop me?" he said. "Come on, open the door. I brought you something." He slid something under the door, a single rose, its petals deep red and wet as if freshly picked. Maya pressed herself against the wall, clutching her phone to her chest as she listened to the faint wail of sirens in the distance. "I'll see you soon," he whispered, and then he was gone. The police arrived moments later, their radios crackling as they surrounded the building. Maya opened the door for them, trembling and clutching the rose he had left behind. She described everything, the notes, the texts, the photographs, and the man's calm, chilling voice outside her door. The officers combed through her apartment, but once again, there was no sign of him. No fingerprints, no footprints, no evidence he'd even been there. It was as if he'd evaporated into thin air. But something felt different this time. Maya could tell the lead officer, a woman named Detective Harris, believed her. She stayed behind after the others left, setting up surveillance cameras and walking Maya through a list of safety precautions. "We'll catch him," Harris promised, her voice firm. "But until then, you're not alone. Call me anytime, day or night." The following days were tense but quiet. Maya didn't sleep much, jumping at every small sound and compulsively checking the cameras Detective Harris had installed. For a week, there was no sign of him. The text stopped. The notes didn't appear. Slowly, she began to hope it was over. Until the footage appeared. One morning, Maya woke to find an alert on her phone from the camera app. A recording had been saved from the living room camera at 3:13 a.m. the night before. She opened it, her heart sinking as she watched. The camera showed her living room, dark and still. Then, a shadow moved across the frame, a figure stepping into view. It was him. He walked slowly, almost casually, stopping to look at the photographs on her shelf. Then he turned toward the camera. He smiled. He walked up to the lens, his face filling the frame as he mouthed the words, "Miss me?" Maya dropped her phone, her entire body shaking. She called Detective Harris, her words spilling out in a frantic rush. Harris arrived within 20 minutes, bringing a small team of officers. They analyzed the footage, dusted for prints, and searched the entire building. Still, they found nothing. "This isn't over," Harris said. "We'll keep a patrol car outside every night. He wants you scared, but don't let him win." That night, Maya sat in her apartment, clutching the knife and listening to the faint hum of the police car parked outside. It should have made her feel safe, but instead, it felt like the calm before the storm. The hours dragged by, and exhaustion finally overcame her. She fell asleep on the couch, the knife resting on the coffee table within arm's reach. She woke to the sound of shattering glass. Her eyes snapped open, her pulse spiking as she grabbed the knife. The living room window was broken, shards glinting in the moonlight. The motion alarm was blaring, but the police car outside was silent. No one was coming. Footsteps echoed down the hallway. Maya's breath came in shallow gasps as she backed into the corner of the room. The figure appeared in the doorway, his silhouette sharp and menacing. He stepped into the light, his face fully visible for the first time. His eyes glinted with an unhinged glee, and his lips curled into that same sickening grin. "You've been so much fun," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. "But all games must come to an end." Maya gripped the knife, her mind racing. "Stay back," she said, her voice steadier than she expected. "The police are right outside." He chuckled, stepping closer. "Oh, Maya, they won't save you." But as he lunged, she acted. Maya plunged the knife into his side, twisting it with all her strength. His scream filled the apartment as he stumbled back, clutching the wound. She didn't stop to think. She ran past him, out the door and down the stairs, her shouts finally drawing the attention of the officers outside. They found him collapsed on the floor of her living room, bleeding but alive. As they cuffed him, he turned his head to look at her, his smile still intact despite the pain. "This isn't over," he rasped. "You'll see." It took weeks for Maya to feel safe again, and even then, the scars lingered. She learned he was a drifter, with a history of stalking and violence, but no one knew his real name. They called him the Whisperer in the press, a moniker that sent chills down her spine every time she heard it. He was sentenced to life in prison, but Maya knew better than to believe she was truly free. She moved to a new city, changed her name, and never told anyone where she went. Even now, years later, she still checks her locks twice before bed and avoids mirrors at night. Because sometimes, when the house is quiet and the shadows stretch long, she swears she hears his voice. "Miss me?" I never expected to uncover anything extraordinary while clearing out my great-aunt Theodora's sprawling Victorian home in Yorkshire. Theodora had lived there alone for decades, a life defined by secrecy, solitude, and rumors that she had dabbled in strange, eccentric research. She passed away at 94, and as her closest relative, the task of sorting through her belongings fell to me. Most of what I found was mundane: dusty furniture, stacks of old newspapers, and box after box of photographs faded with age. Yet, as I ascended into the attic, a space I'd avoided as a child due to its creaking floorboards and pervasive darkness, I stumbled upon something that shifted the narrative of Theodora's life entirely. Buried beneath a pile of moth-eaten blankets was a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed and faintly crackling as I turned them. On the cover, scrawled in elegant script, was a name that froze my breath: Aldrich Blackwood, 1665. The Blackwood name carried weight in our family, spoken of in hushed tones. Aldrich was a distant ancestor, a physician during the Great Plague of London, and according to whispered tales, a man driven to madness by what he witnessed. Family legend painted him as a tragic figure who claimed to have seen something lurking behind the plague, a force not born of pestilence, but of purpose. I sat cross-legged on the dusty floor as rain began to patter against the attic's small, grimy window. The first page of the journal pulled me into a world far darker than anything I could have imagined. 12th of May, 1665. Today I encountered a patient, Thomas Whitmore, presenting with the telltale symptoms of the plague: fever, chills, and an inflamed swelling upon his neck. Yet when I examined the bubo, I witnessed something I cannot explain. Beneath the swelling, the tissue moved, not the tremor of infected flesh, but deliberate, coordinated motion. When I lanced the growth, a rush of dark fluid spilled forth, but within it, I saw something alive. Minute filaments, twisting and writhing like living threads, coiled outward. Under my rudimentary microscope, the fibers revealed crystalline structures that pulsed faintly, as if alive with purpose. The boy succumbed quickly. I preserved samples, driven by the insatiable need to understand what I had seen. The words unsettled me, but what followed was worse. Aldrich detailed how the fibers appeared in every patient he treated. They moved with eerie synchronicity, forming intricate patterns under his microscope. At first, he dismissed his findings as paranoia induced by exhaustion. But soon, he could no longer deny the truth. 15th of May, 1665. The infected describe identical visions in their final hours. Each raves about vast, pulsing networks of tunnels beneath the city. The accounts are chilling in their consistency. These are not fevered ramblings. They speak of something ancient moving through the earth, a consciousness spanning countless threads. I have begun mapping the spread of the disease, and to my horror, the patterns align with the structure of these tunnels as described. This plague is not chaotic. It follows a design. The journal painted a picture of a man unraveling, not because of what he misunderstood, but because of what he understood all too clearly. The disease was not just killing, it was building. Each infected host became a cog in some unimaginable machine, their lymphatic systems transformed into branching networks that mimicked the tunnels described in their visions. As the entries progressed, Aldrich began to notice strange behavior in the city's rats. They gathered in unnatural formations, swarming near infected homes and aligning themselves in patterns he had sketched from his samples. He wrote of strange whispers in his dreams and visions of vast, writhing roots reaching toward a central point beneath London. 25th of May, 1665. My samples have changed. The fibers now grow of their own accord, forming structures that resemble language. When I study them, I feel watched. This morning, I found the rats clustered around my cabinet, their eyes gleaming with an intelligence no earthly creature should possess. And then, tonight, I heard something in the walls, a rustling, a scraping, a movement that does not belong. I am no longer certain my thoughts are my own. The final entries were fragmented and frantic. Aldrich spoke of a colleague, Dr. Edmund Halsey, who had taken some of his samples for further study. Halsey returned days later, his skin pale and marked by the same branching patterns Aldrich had observed in the infected. He claimed to have deciphered the language within the fibers, messages from something waiting beneath the city, something that had been feeding on humanity for centuries. 4th of June, 1665. I hear them outside. The rats came first, followed by the infected. They move in unison, their bodies convulsing in time with some unseen rhythm. Halsey is with them. His voice no longer his own, he calls to me through the door. He says it is my turn to join, that my knowledge has made me a target. The network is complete. The plague was its way of constructing itself, using us as its foundation. I understand now that I cannot stop it. I can only hope to delay its spread. To whoever finds this journal, burn it. Burn it and leave. The patterns are in the walls, in the very air we breathe. Once you see them, they will see you too. The entry ends abruptly, the ink smeared as if the pen had been torn from his hand. I closed the journal, my hands trembling. My rational mind told me it was the work of a man driven mad by grief and exhaustion, but deep down, I felt the weight of his words. As I set the journal down, something caught my eye, a faint, dark mark on my wrist, like an ink stain. When I looked closer, I saw it wasn't a stain at all. Thin, branching lines were spreading beneath my skin, forming intricate patterns. I stared at the branching marks on my wrist, my mind racing. My rational side begged me to dismiss them as a trick of the light, a simple rash, perhaps. But deep down, I already knew. I couldn't unsee them now. The shapes mirrored Aldrich's sketches perfectly, the ones he claimed were part of a network spanning the infected. I left the journal where I found it and fled from the attic. The house seemed to press in on me as I descended the creaking stairs, each shadow in the corners stretching farther than it should. The silence wasn't comforting. It felt watchful, like the air itself was waiting for me to act. Over the next few days, the marks spread. They climbed my arm in delicate, branching lines that followed my veins, growing darker and more defined. I told myself I needed a doctor, but each time I picked up the phone, a quiet voice in my mind whispered, "They won't understand. No one will." It wasn't just the marks. My dreams changed. I saw tunnels stretching endlessly beneath the earth, pulsing with a dim, unnatural light. I could hear whispers in a language I couldn't comprehend but somehow knew. They called to me, pulling me deeper into the labyrinth. Each time I woke, gasping for air, I swore I could still hear the faint rustling of movement behind the walls. And then there was the presence. At first, it was subtle, a feeling of being watched, of something just out of sight. But soon, it became undeniable. Objects in my house began to shift positions. The lights flickered at random. And always, there was the sound of scratching in the walls. Desperation drove me back to Theodora's attic. If Aldrich's journal held answers, there might be more clues among her belongings. The patterns on my skin pulsed faintly, almost guiding me as I searched through the dusty chaos. Behind a rotting chest of drawers, I found it, a locked metal box. It was marked with the same branching designs that now stretched up my forearm. My trembling hands pried it open to reveal a collection of yellowed papers, old photographs, and a single modern USB drive taped to the lid. The papers were notes, fragments from Theodora's own research. She wrote of the Blackwood family's history, of their role as guardians of a dangerous secret. She described how Aldrich's discovery wasn't an anomaly, but part of a repeating pattern across centuries. Every few generations, the network would attempt to re-establish itself, using the Blackwoods as its central node. I plugged the USB into my laptop, and a video file opened. The screen flickered to life, showing Theodora seated in her study, looking gaunt and exhausted. Her voice was low, urgent. "If you're watching this," she began, "then the patterns have started to spread. I'm sorry, I tried to contain it, but I failed. You're part of the network now. It's chosen you as its next node." She paused, coughing violently before continuing. "The patterns you see on your skin, they're not just spreading. They're building. They're forming connections, turning you into part of something vast. Every outbreak of plague, every inexplicable epidemic throughout history, it was the network growing, testing, refining itself." She leaned closer to the camera. "But you need to understand, this isn't an invasion. It's an activation. The network isn't foreign. It's been with us since the beginning, encoded in our DNA, waiting for the right conditions to awaken." My pulse quickened as she spoke, the marks on my skin seeming to hum in resonance with her words. "There are others like you," she said. "Some have embraced their role, becoming agents of the network. Others have fought it, trying to sever their connection. But fighting it always ends the same way. The network isn't something you can destroy. It's a system older than humanity itself, designed to protect the Earth from threats we can't comprehend." Her voice cracked. "But there's something else. Something even the network fears. Deep beneath the Earth, in the tunnels the infected describe in their visions, something stirs. It's been waiting, growing, feeding. If the network is the immune system, then whatever is beneath us is the infection. And now, it's waking up." The video ended abruptly. My laptop screen went black, replaced by a single sentence written in branching patterns. "You are ready. Come to us." The next night, the dreams changed. This time, I wasn't just an observer. I felt myself walking through the tunnels, my bare feet touching the pulsing ground. Shadows writhed along the walls, whispering in languages older than words. Ahead, a great chamber loomed, its walls lined with the same branching patterns that now covered my body. At the center of the chamber, something vast and terrible waited. It wasn't a creature in the traditional sense. It was a mass of roots, tendrils, and pulsing light, shifting and reshaping itself endlessly. It exuded a presence that felt both alien and familiar, as though it had been waiting for me all along. "You have come," it said, though its voice echoed in my mind rather than my ears. "You are the key, the bridge." I awoke drenched in sweat, but I knew what I had to do. The network was calling me, and I could no longer resist. I followed the pull of the patterns to an abandoned mine on the outskirts of Yorkshire. The entrance gaped like a mouth, the air inside thick with the scent of damp earth and decay. As I descended, the marks on my skin pulsed brighter, illuminating the darkness. The tunnels matched my dreams perfectly, down to the smallest detail. I walked for what felt like hours, the whispers growing louder with each step. And then I reached it, the chamber. The tendrils of the network stretched across the walls, glowing faintly. At the center, the pulsing mass awaited me. The moment I stepped inside, The patterns on my skin flared to life, connecting me to the greater whole. Visions flooded my mind. I saw the network's history, its countless battles against the thing beneath us. Each plague, each outbreak, was a war fought in secret, humanity's immune system fighting to keep the infection at bay. But now, the infection was stronger than ever, its roots spreading deeper, its tendrils reaching higher. The network spoke through me, using my voice. We must grow. We must prepare. The infection rises, and only the connected will survive. I don't remember leaving the chamber. When I came to, I was back in Theodora's attic, the journal and USB drive gone. The marks on my skin had faded, leaving only faint scars. But I am not free. The whispers are still with me, guiding me, showing me the patterns hidden in the world. I see them everywhere now. In the veins of leaves, the flow of rivers, the way cities expand and grow. The network is spreading, preparing for the battle to come. And I am its newest node. If you've found this account, the patterns have likely chosen you too. Don't fight them. Embrace them. Become part of the network. Because something is coming. And it won't stop until it has consumed us all.